All right, good evening, everyone. Starting off another live stream here, playing a stream for about an hour, just having some more updates on Hurricane Florence as it continues its approach toward the North Carolina coast, and the impacts will start to be felt tomorrow. So I'll wait for a couple more people to join in. I tried to do a little bit earlier tonight so we could get some more viewers, and hopefully we will be online when the 11 p.m. National Hurricane Center update comes out to see that information, to see if any track changes, and we'll talk about track changes during the later part of this broadcast. If you hear a bit of a noise in the background, my computer is kind of taking off. I have so many tabs open with animated maps, so it might you might be hearing that kind of bleed through the microphone. So I apologize for that. It should subside in a minute, but that's what that noise is. Same format as last night. I have a little scroll down here on the bottom. I've added Greenville, North Carolina, and the Morganton, Lenoir, and Hickory area per request, and I've updated some of the information. That kind of acts as a city by city kind of forecast and look. I've kind of kept it as concise and clear as possible to for impact wise based on locations. But yeah, there's a scroll down there that goes through those. You can feel free to ask questions on the feed here, and I will get to them as I go. Otherwise, just going to go through and talk about individual things, review each of the product from the National Hurricane Center, and give you the most informed decision that I can possibly do to prepare you for a weekend of significant weather, or a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of significant weather, I should say. This is an event that's not measured in hours; it's measured in days. It's going to be a several day long event, and it's going to be a significant event. And I wonder if this loop is actually what's causing my computer to kind of go crazy here. So I'm going to back out of that and maybe go to another view here. So it looks like we have about 7 people watching. Hi to everyone who's joined. Appreciate you for tuning in again tonight. So I guess I'll start off here. I don't want to, there's certain things I want to talk about, like storm surge and stuff, but I want to wait till we have kind of our maximum audience, because I want to make sure that as many people as possible are able to see that information. Excuse me. But, the Hurricane Florence is looking a little more ragged. I guess I could actually zoom in on the storm itself just to show how close it is to North Carolina. Go to a sub-regional sector here on the visible satellite. And here is North Carolina, and here is Hurricane Florence. So you can see it's right on our doorstep. Governor Roy Cooper did a press conference today with emergency management, and he made a pretty profound statement that said disaster is on our doorstep and it's coming in. And that's, a pretty accurate statement. This is, a natural disaster, and it's a very large storm. It looks a little, ragged and elongated and stretched out, but that doesn't, it has been downgraded to a Category 3, but take that with a grain of salt. It is now a Category 3. I don't like to say downgraded because the impacts aren't any less just because it's a Category 3 now. It's lost some of its structural integrity. It looks a little more unorganized, but it's a huge storm. The wind field is much larger now, and that has a big impact for the fetch over the water. So the bigger the storm, the more wind is going to blow that seawater up against the barrier islands and the coastline as it comes over and makes that landfall. And it's a very large storm. I posted earlier today that hello Muriel and Ronnie. I'm gonna guess those are your names. I'm terrible with names, but I'll say Muriel and Ronnie. Thank you for tuning in. It's a very large storm, about 500 miles across, maybe approaching 550 with this later, expansion of the dense overcast here. This is a water vapor imagery, so all the blue and greens you're seeing are representative of clouds, and then the drier air over North Carolina right now. But you may have seen a really pretty sunset earlier, and that'll be the hi Colby, hi to thank you for joining. Hi Amy, hi Ashley and Clayton, thanks for joining. As more people join in, feel free to ask questions. Just going to have kind of a conversational style like I did last night. There's the city-by-city forecast that I've kind of taken from the National Hurricane Center forecast, and I've tried to kind of consolidate it down into very concise little bits that'll scroll across the bottom. If your location is not on there and want more specifics, feel free to comment that, and I will get to those questions as soon as possible. Hi, Gerald. Have you noticed Florence is northeast of the cone now? Didn't know if that's normal or not. Yes, that's a great point. It is drifting. So I'm going to try to pull up a resource that's going to overlay with the cone right now. It's kind of hard to see on here, but it was a little bit, I guess you can kind of make it out on here if I keep this looping here. The center of the storm right now in this loop is right in here, and it's right on the edge of the cone. And this was the cone that was valid. Let's see if I can. Well, I might have to overlay this. So this is the 8 p.m. Wednesday point. So it's supposed to be at this location, 8 p.m. Well, we're past that point now, and then it's supposed to be here 2 a.m. Thursday. And right now it's kind of drifting a little bit more toward the northeast. And these are the kind of things that we really have to watch in the coming hours up to landfall, because it's hugging that right side of the cone. And remember, the cone of uncertainty it's a forecast based on historical data for forecasting storms. It includes a 2 out of 3 storms are going to land in that forecast cone. That represents the center of the storm. It's not an impact-based graphic. So when you have the cone of uncertainty, it's not saying that the hurricane's only going to affect these areas, within the cone. If you're north of this cone, you're not going to get any impacts. That is not at all what it's saying. In fact, it's quite opposite. To if the eye is over here, the center of the storm, you're going to get impacts well outside of that. And this is such a large storm, it's going to encompass the whole state. So Gerald, you make a good point about noticing. I have seen a couple of tweets about that. I'm basically living on Twitter right now, seeing tweets from all across the country from other experts and on some of my colleagues, and it is hugging that right side of the cone, and that's going to play a big role in taking a more northward kind of track, because if you just follow the same line but with the that current position, it kind of mimics that same track and could make landfall 20-30 miles farther north. It could kind of readjust itself overnight and take a more westerly track. So another consideration to that is that the larger the storm is, the more, it's a kind of a clumsy storm. You can think of the storm, the bigger it is, it's very unstable. It's very hard to reach its maximum potential intensity, NPI as that's called in the meteorology world. It's kind of a clumsy storm. It's a little disorganized, and it's kind of clumsy. So it's going to wobble back and forth on the track. So it's not going to take a straight line. It's going to kind of, it might bear west for a bit and then jog back to the northwest and then go back this way and then back up. In fact, I think we can actually visualize that on the past track of the National Hurricane Center. If we can, I don't know if we'll be able to see it here. Well, I guess we can kind of see it here. Well, that's not a very good example, but I was going to show you that, this was a different kind of scenario that led to this, but the track is not a straight line. It wobbles, and those slight wobbles can have very big deviations on the exact landfall location. And in this case, along the coast, that precise landfall location is going to be a big factor in, right, Gerald, it's moved so many times. It's moved on quite a lot. It's taken a very strange path. It's kind of carving its own path. It hasn't followed any climatological tracks. It hasn't followed any kind of pattern. And the forecast still captures that, but that's why they forecast it with a cone and not a line, simply because, it's saying that the center could lie anywhere within here. And it's an interesting point we have to keep monitoring to see if it adjusts itself overnight. And if we wake up tomorrow and, it's still on that right side of the cone, then the area between Wilmington and Morehead City, this kind of bend in North Carolina, needs to, pay more attention to that, because that may mean that more severe impacts could be felt in that direction. One thing I want to point out here is to notice the wind field. So this is a track, and then you see this legend down here for the current wind extent. This is hurricane, is that kind of brown red color, and then the yellow is tropical storm. Look how big this wind field is. You could tell by the size of the storm on the other graph, but that's if I kind of extrapolate that, that's like this size over North Carolina. This is a big storm. It doesn't, whether it goes 20 miles south or 20 miles north, all of the Carolinas and Southern Virginia and parts of Eastern Georgia are going to feel impacts. It's a huge storm. Storms tend to kind of grow in size when they get to this point in the Atlantic Basin, because they're kind of getting, hammered from all directions. They're getting shear right now, and dry air is getting entrained into the middle of Florence right now. You can kind of see, the ragged look down here. Actually, I think this is best viewed on this other map with, I guess this is a good view. So if I zoom out here, there's a lot of drier air down here. This is water vapor imagery. So the green, you can think of the green as the more moist, the more humid air mass. And a lot of dry air is getting entrained into, not a lot of dry air, but some is getting kind of pulled in the upper levels, which is making it harder to maintain its strength, which is good news, but it doesn't really help us at this point, because the storm is just very large. It's expanding in size. It's, the tropical storm force winds are pretty much from, this area to probably say this darker band right here is probably a pretty heavy rain band. So this distance here, that's basically the width of North Carolina. It's a large storm. So we're all going to feel impacts. We're all going to feel wind. That was a point of emphasis I tried to make last night and on a post I made on my page earlier. A small shift in the track doesn't mean you're in the clear. It doesn't mean, for storm surge purposes, it might have, that's where it's going to have its biggest impact. But the overall shift of the track, that doesn't really mean anything at this point. The storm is coming to the Carolinas, and we have to prepare for that. So I hope that answered your question, Gerald. Hi, Olivia. Thanks for tuning in. If you're just now joining, just having another kind of conversation-style discussion about Hurricane Florence. It is the night of reckoning with the storm. We wake up tomorrow, and tomorrow will be the first day that we start feeling the impacts of the storm that we've talked about for over a week. It's been exhausting. It's been a grueling process getting to this point, and it's kind of the night. I hope you enjoyed the sunset tonight, because it is you're not going to see the sun or the clear sky for a couple of days because of this massive storm that's just going to sit over us for a long period of time, specifically through Sunday into Monday. If you have any questions, feel free to just comment there, and I will see them pop up, and I'll do my best to answer them. Or if I can't answer it online here, I will point you to someone who can. I'm not really going to answer any questions about evacuations, because you should have done that at this point. All preparation should be done at this point. You have a very small window of time if you live in central North Carolina to do something in the morning. If you need to tie down some loose lawn furniture or need to run a quick errand, do it and get back, because the tropical storm force winds are going to kind of kick into gear noon tomorrow into late tomorrow night. This time tomorrow night, I may not have electricity. The wind gusts will really be picking up, and depending on how fast the storm approaches, we can look at model runs all night, but this is the point of the storm. It's like when a thunderstorm comes over a location. It doesn't matter what the model is going to show anymore. You have to deal with what the storm is doing right then and where it's going. If it's a warned thunderstorm, you have to warn the people right away what it's going to be doing in the next 5 minutes. Hi, Anthony. Thanks for joining in. If you have any questions, feel free to comment on this feed here. But you have to. We call it nowcasting in the meteorological community, when you kind of say, hey, throw off the model guidance at this point. It's close enough that we can see, right there what's happening with it, and we need to make adjustments accordingly. So, one of those nowcasting elements would be seeing that it's on the right side of the cone. So I would, take more heed in the Jacksonville area and the New Bern area and the Morehead City area. And I'm going to show some storm surge maps later. And I'm very concerned about those areas, just because they lay in a very vulnerable place. And there hasn't been a storm of this size approaching from this direction. And the last time this happened was, back with Hurricane Hazel back in 1954. Well, the population of North Carolina has probably tripled. I don't know the exact number, but a lot more development in that area. So I'm getting increasingly concerned for this area down here. So I'll kind of leave that point alone for now and move on to something else. But this is a very, very great website. It's called SatSquatch, which it's a clever name. But you can overlay a lot of different layers, and I really like it's a very pleasing kind of aesthetic look, and it's very, very clean data to look at and kind of get a good picture of what's going on. So I'm going to back off of this page because I think it's wearing my computer down a little bit. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions, feel free to comment on there. I have a screen crawl down here showing some city-by-city impacts to kind of summarize some impacts that you can expect from those different regions. But if you have any specific questions pertaining to the storm or the storm, the meteorology of the storm, I'll be happy to try my best to answer them, or at least give you my best educated guess. So one thing I wanted to talk about is the storm surge, because that is the biggest threat, and it's not something you have to worry about inland, but on the coast, it is the thing you should worry the most about. So this is a website called Now Coast from NOAA, and it shows right now I have overlaid, there's a lot of information on this webpage, and if you hear kind of a noise from kind of a humming noise in the background, it's actually my computer working really hard right now to have all these links open with the animating Hurricane Florence animations going on. It's kind of eating away at my memory, but I have it plugged in, so we should be good, but I apologize for that noise. Hi, Daniel. Thanks for tuning in from Asheville, North Carolina. You can expect some impacts probably around, late Saturday into Sunday range with some gusty winds, and the rainfall is a big question in this. So depending on its exact track, it's going to depend on how much rainfall does accumulate in that area. So Asheville is one of those places where you could get, a healthy amount of rain, and 4 to 6 inches or so. You could kind of be left high and dry. It just depends on what exact track and how the storm holds together. So you to be prepared for some, upslope rain in that area, but nothing's, exactly certain at this point. But getting back to storm surge here, this is, a website called Now Coast. It has a bunch of different variables right now. I have Oh, you're an atmospheric student at UNC Asheville. That's awesome. I am a atmospheric science student at NC State University. So I'm a senior. I've had a bunch of people actually like my page today. I think a post got shared and some people joined in. So if you're just now tuning in, I am a senior at NC State University in Raleigh, studying meteorology. So I am not a official meteorologist yet, but it's my passion, and I want to devote my time to doing that. So you're not talking to an expert; you're talking to an amateur forecaster. Just keep that in mind. I try my best to be a channel to official information, but I pride myself on being able to take individual focus, and I don't have 3.5 minutes on the news that I'm limited to talk about information. So I can do live streams like this and address topics and kind of give my own perspective on things with no time restrictions or anything. So that's awesome. Hope your studies are going well, and I'm sure you're pretty intrigued by the storm like I am. It's a very, very unique event. It's kind of carving its own path into weather history. There's not really been another storm like that. Hi Sean, hope you're doing well. Hi Melissa, hi from Mount Airy. So I'm well aware you guys stay safe. A couple of my friends. It's not letting me see the rest of your comment for some reason. I'm not sure why that's happening. But that's awesome. I will. I'll see if I can. I'll see more about that after the live stream, and then see what some of your thoughts are on the storm. But so getting back to storm surge here, this is completely dependent on the track of the storm. So right now, the storm surge forecast, the worst of the storm surge is going to be on the right side of the storm. Why? Well, let's take a look back here. I'm going to go back to this view now. This is commonly called the sandwich view. Because I'm not exactly sure why they call it the sandwich view, but I guess because of the colors, but they call that this kind of band of the satellite is referred to that. And I'm not going to keep this image still so I can, draw on it and kind of annotate it. But the storm is moving in this direction, roughly. It's not exact, but I wanted to show you that. So this, you can tell just by this image, the northeastern quadrant of the storm. So this area is going to be the worst of the impacts. You have the forward motion of the storm in concert, concurrent at the same time with the actual wind speed, and the hurricane is rotating counterclockwise. So you have counterclockwise rotation, and then you have the forward speed. So you have kind of a double punch. And when that comes to wind and momentum, you're basically like multiplying by like 1.5 times the force. So that right front quadrant really packs a wallop when it comes onto land, and that's where you have your worst impacts, and also where you have to watch out for quick spin-ups of tornadoes. Last night I gave my example to where if you're driving on a highway and slam on brakes, you kind of fishtail and spin around. Well, that's what's happening with air parcels. They're smoothly gliding over the water, and then they hit land and they encounter friction and can cause little quick spin-up tornadoes, which can cause even more damage on top of the already lots of tree damage that we're likely to see, and some structural damage along the barrier islands with some higher winds. But getting back to this, if the storm makes landfall down in Wilmington, the worst storm surge impacts are going to be felt, in this area. There's going to be water pushed up all along. I think there's a storm surge warning from Duck up here all the way down to the South Santee River down here in South Carolina. I mean, all of this area is going to receive an influx of water. There's already some area, I think, down in Oriental. I'm not exactly sure where that is, and I try to be a stickler on my geography. I try to keep up, and I try to pride myself on that. So, but Oriental, if anyone is familiar with where Oriental is on the North Carolina coast, has already seen a little bit of flooding with some of just the high tide coming in. It's this storm is just pushing waves of water up, and it's just increasingly getting, as it gets closer, it's just pushing that water. And then when you have these winds and with the slow motion of the storm over here, it's just going to keep pounding these areas. So if it makes landfall, in the Wilmington area, it's a little south of Wilmington, this area is going to receive the worst impacts because it's on that right front quadrant. If it takes a more northerly track, which it seems to be hugging the right side of that forecast cone, so if it makes a landfall more, in the bend of North Carolina here, there will be, bad impacts up here, south of Morehead City, and there will be a lot more impacts up here in the western part of the Pamlico Sound and pushing, well inland into, more estuary habitat up here, where you have Greenville is at the edge of this estuary, and then New Bern is the edge of this, estuary up here. So a lot of very populated areas, at these points where you see the water kind of ending. And that's my biggest concern is the storm surge in this, because we haven't had, with Harvey, the big, deal was the rainfall. With, Irma, there was a storm surge threat, but the big thing was just, the sheer size of the storm, the sheer power of the storm. With this, we haven't had a big storm surge event like this in a long time, where such a vast amount of land, a vast amount of real estate was under the threat for such significant storm surge. And I wanted to show you quickly, what exactly I mean by that. From all the way up to the northern, So Duck right here is a storm surge warning. The storm surge watch is in purple. This was a graphic I pulled off of Twitter just before starting this stream, so it should reflect the most recent information. But up from here, up to the North Carolina and Virginia border, down to central South Carolina, anywhere from 2 to 4 feet down here in Charleston, which is enough to flood Charleston. Charleston is in a terrible spot for flooding. And up here, the Outer Banks and the Inner Banks in here, and then the Albemarle Pamlico Peninsula up here, really at threat for 9 to 13 foot storm surge. That's a lot of water. You might say, oh, I heard on the news earlier that a satellite passed over and recorded like a 80 something foot wave, and that's not significant wave height. That's a totally different way to measure waves. You might kind of glance at 9 to 13 and say, that's not that bad, right? But you put it in perspective, and we're on average 6 feet tall. So when you have 0 to 3 foot storm surge, that's enough to lift a car off. And then off the ground, I think it takes 6 inches of water to destabilize your car and 2 feet of water to completely carry your car away. And then you get up to 3 to 6 feet, you're talking about people being completely submerged at this point. If there are 3 to 6 feet of storm surge surrounding a place where you've evacuated to or something, you have to get to higher ground because that's deep. There can be cars floating in that. There can be large pieces of houses floating in that at that point. 6 to 9 feet is extraordinary enough. That's 9 feet of standing water above the ground. The force of that water is exceptional. But they're forecasting 9 to 13 foot of storm surge. That's enough to completely obliterate this. And I hesitate to show this picture because of it's sensationalism, and you kind of latched onto the picture. But this was a famous picture from Hurricane Ike back in 2008, and I want to zoom in here. There's a famous picture because everyone wants to know who the contractor was for this house and what they wanted. They wanted their house built by the same contractor because it was so safe, and was the only house standing. This was Hurricane Ike hit off of the Texas coast, and these are some of the barrier islands off of the Texas coast. And Hurricane Ike was a Category 2 at landfall. It was a huge storm, kind of similar to this one, where it just kind of became really disorganized looking, but it was just a very large storm. It had a very big wind field. Made landfall as a Category 2 hurricane and caused this on the barrier islands of the Texas coast. I am not at all saying that's what's going to happen for our areas like Topsail Beach or Curry Beach or Figure 8 Island. Those are just areas I think of that have similar characteristics to this. It's not out of the realm of possibility when you have 9 to 13 feet of water coming on shore. It's a pretty sobering thought to think about, but this is the kind of scene that was caused by storm surge of that magnitude in Texas. So I'm not trying to foreshadow anything. I'm not trying to, be sensationalistic and say this is what's going to happen, but this is what's possible with, greater than, say 6 to 9 foot storm surge. The people of this house are very lucky, and that's a very seldom are you going to see that on a barrier island after significant storm surge. So I show that kind of with some hesitation, but that's what can happen with this situation. I'm not saying it's going to, but that's possible. Those are some of the images that are possible we could see from after the storm. That's what kind of storm this is. It's not anything to play with. It's not just another storm. It's a serious situation. And if you live on the coast and you have not evacuated, time is kind of running out at this point. But that's what you could be facing. So going back to this to kind of summarize, 2 to 4 foot of storm surge up on the northern part of the Outer Banks with, Kitty Hawk, Kill Devil Hills, Duck up here, Southern Shores. You have Cape Hatteras down here. You have Ocracoke Island down here at Cape Lookout, and Morehead City in here. Cherry Point is in here. New River Marine Corps Air Station down here in Camp Lejeune and Onslow County. Topsail Beach and areas are in here. Curry Beach, Carolina Beach are in here. The Crystal Coast down here with Charlotte. I can't place any of the other cities right now. And having Wrightsville Beach is down here as well in Wilmington. Very populated areas. So I'm extremely concerned about the structural damage that's possible from that, and just having a massive economic cost. Of course, the potential for the loss of life is of course the primary concern, but just a big mess I think is going to await people when they return back to the Outer Banks. It's just that kind of situation that Mother Nature was here first, and we have built up here, and Mother Nature is reclaiming her, her territory. So it's just something that, to keep in mind. It's a sobering thought, but it's the reality with these storms. They push huge amounts of water inland, and with this storm expected to be so slow, the possibility is there for some very bad storm surge. So inland, you don't have to worry about storm surge, but you do have to worry about the rainfall threat. So I'm going to go back to the Hurricane Center here, and I'll roll through these other graphics in a little bit. But this is the latest U.S. rainfall QPF. That's quality precipitation forecast. That's another way. In the winter time, that means something else. But for now, in the the summer and the fall time, that just means that rainfall. It's just rainfall. So this is the latest rainfall outlook release. Let's see, this was valid 8 p.m. Wednesday. So this was the latest. I'm expecting a new advisory. I see them tweeting it out. I have tweets coming to my phone from the National Hurricane Center, and they haven't done Florence's advisory yet, but they will soon. So we'll jump over to that when that happens and see the information hot off of the presses. But the main thing you draw your eye to here is, yes, you're not seeing wrong. That's 20 inches of rain in this entire southeast portion of North Carolina. You have up here, New Bern or Greenville is up here. New Bern is down here. Jacksonville is here, and Wilmington is here. So those are all large, metropolitan areas that could see 15 to 20 inches of rain. And that's, during Matthew, a lot of those areas saw, 9 to 12 or so. But this is all rain and luckily the soils aren't saturated. But anytime you have that amount of rain, it's going to cause problems. It's going to cause, cause some issues. So it's becoming extremely concerning to see the rainfall forecast, and especially if the storm is even bigger, a larger area could receive more rainfall. Up in the triangle, totals have been bumped down to 4 to 6 inches. I say bumped down like that's a good thing. 4 to 6 inches of rain is still enough to cause plenty of issues. In the triad, you kind of see this lesser amount creeping down here. But the main thing I want to point out is this, into the Midlands of South Carolina and upstate South Carolina, and down here at the border, all of this is expanding westward because the storm is expected to kind of jog inland a little bit. So, jump back to the forecast cone in a minute. It's going to jump up here and then kind of just drift inland, and it's just going to drop so much rain, and that's just not a good situation because you have all the water pushed up from the coast going upstream in the rivers, and then you have all the rain that falls here, and it has to go somewhere, and it's going to go along with the gradient down elevation with gravity down to the coast, and then you have a bunching up of water between those two, and you get the really bad flooding situations in those kind of cities that are in the coastal plain of both of these states. So that's a big concern there. This is going to be a triple threat storm. You have the massive storm surge that I just talked about, the rainfall, and then the winds. We have so many trees in this area, so many pine trees that are very susceptible to wind. And I'll talk about wind in a second in more detail. I have a kind of a theory about that I thought about of why I'm so concerned about the wind and the tree damage. But I want to jump back over to the forecast track in case anyone's just now joining, just kind of running through some National Hurricane Center forecast products, having a conversational style talk about Hurricane Florence and its impacts on this kind of night of reckoning with the storm. This is the last night where we will be free of any impacts. And then tomorrow when we wake up, we'll be under, cloud. It'll be cloudy skies. It'll be a little bit breezy. It'll get continually more breezy as the storm approaches, and is expected to make a landfall in southern North Carolina right here. And, things go downhill from here until, probably about Saturday, Sunday. So we're in for the long haul. It's going to be a significant weather high impact in the situation. So I'll leave it on the hurricane track here while I look at a few of these questions that have popped up. Excuse me. Hi from Mount Airy. You're doing well. Angela, hello from Kernersville. Thanks for watching. Teresa, how is the Piedmont looking now that there is a possibility of a southward shift? So to make a long conversation short, I kind of just talked about that before you joined in. With the sheer size of the storm, this is huge. This is the size of North Carolina, okay? To answer your question, the forecast really hasn't changed. Rainfall totals might be printing out, and the graphics might show a little bit less, but this storm is so large that I don't think there's really going to be a big difference in the forecast. You can still expect, 2 to 6 inches of rain, locally higher amounts, wind gust up to, 40 to 50 miles per hour, worsening conditions from Thursday into Friday and then Saturday. I think that's still going to be a situation there. So, the Piedmont Triad area, I still think it's going to see the same amount of effects. That southward shift, some of the model guidance has come in more north tonight. So someone asked earlier in this stream, about where the storm was in relation to its current forecasted path, and it's a little bit off. So I think I just saw the new advisory pop up, so I can actually see over and see if they've updated it. And it looks like they haven't posted on here late. Yeah, not a problem for joining late. I plan to stream for until about 11:15 or so, so that's not a problem. I just wanted to address that again. I don't think that the impacts are really going to change that much. That's such a large storm. I think couple miles shift in track is make a difference. If it took this track or a track that's more northerly, like it was showing earlier in the week, I think the impacts are going to be the same for you. So to answer your question, I don't think that there will be much of a difference in impacts for you. So thanks for asking. If you have any questions, just feel free to comment on this comment feed here. I have a scroll down here at the bottom with some kind of generalized impacts for cities. It'll loop through. It's a continuous loop throughout the entire broadcast. If your city's not on there, feel free to ask a question. I'm just going through, a bunch of products that are available online. Going through, tonight's kind of the final night we have free of any impacts, and I want to just have a normal conversation style, talk about Florence, nothing too jargony or too sciencey. Just kind of wanted to talk about, what you can expect and what we can, look forward to seeing tomorrow, Friday, into Saturday. This will be an event that's measured in days, not hours. I've said that a couple of times now, but it's worth reiterating. It's going to be a multi-day event. It's not just something that comes through and blows off and goes away. It's going to linger for several days, so you'll be hearing about it for a while. I keep refreshing the page, but it looks like the 11 p.m. Advisory hasn't posted yet. I'm interested to see if they adjusted the track at all, but we'll keep checking back on that. So I don't think there's anything to show you over here. Let's see what I can show you next. So I will show you a GFS model. Last night I couldn't get this to work, and I figured out why. It was actually because, so Raleigh may be okay. We have people to pick up at RDU Friday. What time on Friday, Teresa, for that? Because that's a key part of that equation. So if you could respond with what time you're picking up people from RDU, that would be helpful in interpreting that question. Let's see. Devin, if you had to forecast, do you buy the euro and think Florence will drift southward? It's a good question to kind of feel at this time because, this is what's going on. So I'm going to put it to forecast hour 0. So this initialized at 18Z. So earlier this afternoon, this is the latest guidance we have available. Next one will come out at about 12:30 to 1 a.m. That's when the 0Z GFS will come out. But this is the American model. And right now I'm showing you 500 millibars. So this is about halfway up the atmosphere. The blue right here is obviously Florence, and all of this red represents a ridge. If you wanted the storm to curve back out to sea, what you would want to see here is a big cold front. So if I were to draw, a cold front in here, usually when we have tropical systems, you'd see a cold front or something in here. And that would be great news because that would come along and it would basically push the storm out. But we don't have that feature here. Instead, we have this big ridge, this big area, and that's the lack of that is allowing Florence to keep trucking westward. And the problem is, it's kind of like Pac-Man here. It's like the ridge is kind of consuming Florence and doesn't really have anywhere to go. So if every time I advance this, it goes forward 6 hours in time. I'll scroll up so you can see the information about the model here. But this is 60. This is 12. This is tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Then this is 1 p.m. Then that's about 8 p.m. tomorrow, and then this is early Friday morning. And, Florence just kind of sits there, and the reason why, there's nothing to take it away. It just, if I toggle back and forth here, there's nothing happening. This ridge just completely consumes the storm and doesn't allow it to go anywhere else. The ridge is kind of blocking, and this is a very strong ridge up here in Maine. They're seeing, above average temperatures and very dry conditions. There's nothing to move Florence away. It just sits there. But if I advance forward in time, Florence kind of scoots into South Carolina over northern Georgia, and then kind of a weakness opens up in the ridge right here, and it kind of takes advantage of that and pushes up. So this anomaly right here, this difference, in the ridge is actually the remnants of Florence that'll be pushing up into the ridge, and it kind of escapes and goes away, and this disappears. But, until it gets to that point, there's nothing. It's just kind of trapped in this area where it can't penetrate the ridge. It can't go south of the ridge. Tropical cyclones want to naturally go to the northwest because of, dynamics of the earth moving. There's something called beta gyres that are kind of like small circulations on either side of the hurricane, and they automatically propel the thing northwestward. And there's no kind of driving force to move it out of the way. So it just sits here, and the ridge just kind of blocks it. So that's why it's such a problem, because, if I go from here to that point, that was 24 hours that I just showed you, and it moved that much. It moved, maybe 100 miles. in 24 hours. And that's why I'm so concerned about the storm surge forecast. With this situation, I think, 9 feet of water are going to pile up. We're this size for comparison. A lot of water is going to pile up in that area because it's going to be hammering the coast for so long. So I'm very, very concerned for our friends down in the Wilmington and the, Topsail Beach area. So, that's something I'm quite concerned with. So here's the 11 p.m. advisory. And so I saw someone comment that as well. Teresa, I'll get to your question in just a second. Thank you, Daniel. Florence weakens a little bit. Now it's 10. So, okay, it's a category 2 now. So don't let your guard down. Ike was a category 2, and it caused that damage that I showed earlier for some people who excuse me, I lost my train of thought for a second. For those of you who may have joined a little bit later, I showed a picture of the damage from Hurricane Ike, which had the barrier islands just destroyed. It was a category 2 hurricane, but it was so large and had such significant storm surge that it just completely obliterated some of the barrier islands in Texas about 10 years ago. So the United States is no stranger to these storms, but we haven't had such a significant threat in so long that I think people are kind of glazing over that. And if you're not at the coast, you don't have to worry about it. But if you are, that's the main thing you need to worry about. This is storm surge. So thanks, Daniel, for sharing that. Here's the 11 p.m. advisory. It looks like the track maybe didn't shift too much. Maybe I can't quite tell. I can't pull up the old one I'm not going to go through that process right now, pulling up the old one in the archive, but it has it, and that's exactly what we just showed on the model. It was coming on shore, and then it droops down south and shoots back up, and that weakness when the ridge kind of breaks down a little bit. So still it has a landfalling hurricane right near Wilmington. I think that's going to put the worst of the impacts right in this area. So if I go to our county map, it's just Google Maps with counties overlaid. So if we kind of match up these maps, that has the storm making landfall at 8 a.m. Friday, somewhere around that early morning Friday, right in this area, somewhere in here. So down here's Cape Fear, here's Bald Head Island, Oak Island. You can see all the locations for reference. So if that were to verify, and that's obviously the closer we get to time, the more accurate the track's going to be. So if the storm is coming in this way and makes landfall and goes this way, sort of, the worst of the storm surge impacts are going to be in this area, which is pretty much some of the most populated coastline in this region of the state, at least. So that's a big concern. I'm worried about that. That's something I with each model run and in each kind of hour that takes by, I'm getting more concerned with areas like Topsail Beach and Surf City, Sneads Ferry, Emerald Isle. I think storm surge is going to be really bad down there, and that's going to be probably what we remember most from this storm. And just the flooding overall. So that's a little bit concerning, but the winds have come down a little bit. It'll probably fluctuate in strength as it continues. I saw someone comment about, thanks, Teresa, the waters are warmer toward the coast. I think I saw 85 to 86 degrees. Will it strengthen then? Well, to answer your question, it's kind of enduring a little bit of a wind shear right now. It's having a hard time. With the bigger storm, it's a little more clumsy. It's kind of all over the place. And let's see, this graphic has changed since the last time I've seen it, but it's battling. So here's the circulation. You can see the concentration of these lines, and it's battling a little bit of shear on the southern side of the storm. It's kind of enduring that. There's a little bit of dry air that's coming out, in the south side of the storm, and it's kind of giving it that ragged look. So I'm going to show you this, and I'm going to jump over to the actual imagery of the storm and show you how this relates. So you have shear coming up from the bottom here. I made that mistake of clicking this window again. I'll get back to the scroll in a second. I know I'm covering it up. You have shear. Maybe I can't draw on this image, so I'll show you another one. But you have shear coming up from the south here, getting, blowing the storm. And when I jump back over, you'll see it kind of looks like a hamburger bun at this point. The southern part is kind of flat, and then you have the round top of the storm, kind of the typical what you'd expect of a hurricane. Is pretty symmetrical, but right now it's kind of elongated, kind of looks like a hamburger bun. And the reason that the bottom is kind of flat and kind of ugly looking and disorganized, which is good, but it's unorganized because of this shear that's blowing in. These red colors indicate 25 knot to 30 knot shear blowing in from this direction. So it's disrupting the center of the storm, which is why you see that drop in winds today. And also a little bit of dry air is getting entrained in the upper levels, which also disrupts the flow. The eye kind of closed up, and clouds were obscuring it earlier today, which is another sign that the storm is weakening. So if I jump back over to That's a good view. I think I'll stick with this view this time. So once again, if you're just now joining, this is how close the storm is to the coast. It's on our doorstep, and by this time tomorrow, we're going to be starting to feel the impacts from Florence, and it will last through the weekend. But here is, here's that area of shear I'm talking about. You can see it's just kind of ragged looking, kind of has this shape of, a semicircle. That's a really bad drawing, but you get the idea what I was going for there, and you have air coming in from here. You have shear blowing in, disrupting the flow. The eye kind of is all over the place right now. It kind of lost its eye. It's still an organized storm. It's still a powerful storm. Don't take that, take that with a grain of salt. This is not something, it's weakened to a category 2, but the threats have not diminished. In fact, they're about the same because the storm is still growing in size. So if I move this out of the way, you can see the rest of the storm. Some dry air down here getting wrapped up in the upper levels as well. It's just because the winds have dropped doesn't mean that the threats are any less. And also with the bigger storms, the maximum sustained winds may be lower, but the gust potential is actually, higher because you have a lot of momentum. It's a fixed system. You have a fixed amount of momentum in the storm, and it all has to wind out and come out somewhere. So you're going to have higher gusts, still probably over 100 miles per hour down in, Wilmington area. Totally not out of the question, still have those very high gusts. The storm kind of struggling right now, but as it does get over those warmer waters, like Teresa mentioned, it is possible it could kind of jump back up to a category 3 to a major hurricane tomorrow. But do not underestimate the category 2 Ike hurricane back in 2008. Hurricane Ike caused that damage that I showed earlier, that picture, with the barrier islands completely wiped out. So, I'll pull that up for people who may just now be joining. Hi, Fela. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for tuning in tonight. I know it's a little bit later, but thanks for tuning in and listening to some information about the hurricane. Hope you're doing well. I've lost the picture. Here's the picture. A category 2 storm did this in Texas 10 years ago. Whoever built this house, I want to know, but everything else on this barrier island was completely obliterated. I don't have a before picture, but these were all beach houses. You can see the foundation of a house right here. You can see what looks like a roof down here. This is not from Florence. This is from Hurricane Ike 10 years ago. This is what storm surge can do to barrier islands. And if I zoom in, here to Topsail Beach is a barrier island. Figure 8 island down here in New Hanover County and Pender County and Onslow County, you have some really populated, beaches that have that potential to be in that position where they could have some devastating impacts from storm surge. So, Teresa, to answer your question, it is possible it could kind of jump back up in strength tomorrow. I think it'll get more organized overnight. It's a little bit disrupted by this year. This year will kind of slack off a little bit overnight, and the dry air will continue down here, but I think it's going to kind of get its act together. This latest frame looks like it's starting to kind of looks like it's refreshing. It's doing its own thing now. But here we go. Looks like it's back. It's going to struggle a little bit, but I think it's going to intensify just a little bit when it gets back on shore. And the biggest concern I have is if the storm gets to a point out here and slows down, as long as the center of circulation is still over water, it's still going to be pulling up that ocean water and at least maintaining its strength. It will weaken very slowly or maintain its strength. So that's something to consider. It's not going to weaken until that center of circulation gets completely over land and the water supply is completely cut off. So that's something to remember in terms of that. Teresa, thanks for inviting. Thanks for joining. To anyone who's just now joining, just going to be online for about 15 more minutes or so, maybe 20 more minutes, and just having conversation. Tonight's the night of reckoning with Hurricane Florence. The last free night of electricity and calm winds outside. Tomorrow night at this time, we'll probably be dealing with gusty winds and some rain moving in. Speaking of rain, I want to show you the radar too. We're starting to see our first glimpse of the storm on radar. So down here is a scrolling list of city-by-city threats, kind of generalized area with some regions and some what you can expect. If your city's not listed on there, feel free to comment and I will get to it. But this is out of the radar down here in Morehead City. The center of the radar is right here. And, here are some of the outer bands starting to show up. Now, this is, several hundred miles away. It's actually, the farthest out band's about 150 miles away. But, it's just to show you that, hey, the storm is right here. It's on our doorstep and it's close. And by this time tomorrow, these outer rain bands will be starting to make their way over the barrier islands and the southern Outer Banks. Ocracoke Island up here, Morehead City, Jacksonville, Wilmington. We'll start to see that rain move in probably within about 12 hours. Tomorrow mid-morning we'll start to see those rain bands move in, but we're starting to see the storm on radar. So someone asked the other day about is the rain going to be uniform? Is it going to be like scattered rainy showers, or is it going to be constant rain? You'll probably have some showers before the onset of the rain. Will be kind of showery. See how these are kind of scattered and broken up. Now this is long range radar, so this is also looking very high up into the atmosphere, so these might not exactly be reaching the ground, but you're going to have scattered rain. But then when it sets, the onset of the rain is going to be constant, so you're going to be in those rain bands for a long period of time. Do not drive. Please avoid travel at any cost. Your car acts like a big sail when it's on the road. When you have hurricane force winds, these aren't normal winds like in a thunderstorm where it gusts and it's over. This will be sustained winds, so it'll be continuously going. And if you have anything taller than a couple of feet, like your car, maybe 5-6 feet off the ground, it's going to catch that wind, and it makes driving very difficult. And you already have that already simultaneously with the rain falling on your windshield. You can't see. There could be trees in your way. I'm very concerned about the tree damage potential across the state. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about. We're so used to our weather coming from the western part of, the western part. Generally in the United States, North America, weather goes from the west to east. It travels from the west coast to the east coast in about 4 days or so. So we're used to our winds coming from this direction. Sometimes we get a lot of weather from this direction, but we're not used to having winds coming off of the ocean and from the east. So our trees are really accustomed to holding on from that. But when you have winds flying in this direction and this direction, and they're coming in this way, our trees are more susceptible to probably not like that too much, and they're probably more likely to fall or have damage. Large branches come down. A large branch can do just as much damage and down a power line. The whole tree doesn't have to come down. So tree damage, you'll see that repeated a lot in the little scroll at the bottom of the screen. I've included that because tree damage is a big thing, and a tree can fall. And expect power outages for several days, because as the trees fall, it can block the linemen can't get up to fix the power. Number one, because it's insanely windy and rainy, but also trees can be blocking their way. So there's going to be roads that become impassable. It's going to be just a mess, and that's why you have to stay inside, hunker down. If you lose power, make sure you have supplies. Tomorrow morning is your absolute last chance to get out before the storm. You have very limited time in central North Carolina to get out before the winds start deteriorating and conditions start to worsen. In that, thanks, Bryce. Glad you're enjoying. Glad I can be helpful to you. So if you have any more questions, I'm going to be streaming for about 10-15 more minutes, then I'm going to wrap it up. I'll have another, if power permitting, I'll try to do an update tomorrow afternoon, maybe tomorrow early afternoon. I won't do one late tomorrow night because I think conditions will be too nasty to try to do that, and don't want to risk losing power in the middle of the broadcast. So I will do one tomorrow afternoon as the storm really begins to make its presence felt on the North Carolina coast. I don't have much more to show the storm surge potential. So this was a map. I will refresh this to see if it reflects the latest information. It doesn't look like it does. It doesn't have that large jump northward, but this is what I was talking about with the worst of the weather being on the right side of the storm. So this cone is now outdated. The National Hurricane Center just had an update a couple of minutes ago, and that's a couple questions coming in. I'll get to those in just a second. So, the worst of the storm surge is going to be on that right side. This particular model has the maximum of the storm surge, off of the barrier islands, Curry Beach, Carolina Beach, Topsail Beach, Surf City, up through Emerald Isle, having, a lot of storm surge. And that's really concerning to see because those are low-lying areas. Obviously, they're barrier islands. That's prime beach location where there's, nothing but the beach and the sand. So, very vulnerable areas there. You have water being pushed up into these inlets and the estuary habitats up into Jacksonville. Camp Lejeune is over here, Emerald Isle. Water can be pushed on the other side of the Pamlico Sound up into rural Beaufort County and Pamlico County. Here is Oriental. I talked earlier. There's already water starting to rise in Oriental just because of high tide. So that's, as the storm gets closer, that's going to continue to worsen up into New Bern, up into Vanceboro, Grifton. The Kinston area, the Neuse River, drains down here. The Tar River over here. It's just not a good situation. So I see someone commenting about the northern Outer Banks too. not as bad, but still storm surge is very likely. With the storm kind of taking that more southerly track, this is of one point of emphasis where the southerly track does have an impact because the northern Outer Banks don't really have. I zoom out to get a better understanding of where I'm at here. Not as bad of impacts, especially when you get past this point of inflection, past Cape Hatteras. The direction of the water really changes, so you'd have to have a storm coming in kind of this way or riding the Outer Banks here to pull in water over that area. So you look to be safe from really bad storm surge up in Kill Devil Hills, Nag's Head, Kitty Hawk, Manteo over here, down here in Rodanthe. I think that's mostly safe from any bad storm surge, but it's still possible to have some flash flooding and overwash on Highway 12 and areas like that where you typically have your overwash with these storms. But the worst of the storm surge is becoming the imagery is not the imagery. The forecast is becoming very grim for that area. It looks like it's going to be a pretty bad situation for those areas. Hoping for the best. So, Mary, so that's the question I was kind of talking to there. Northern Outer Banks, you can expect, rain potential is going to be very tricky up there because it depends on how large. The storm is quite large right now. If I go back to this view, this is a water vapor imagery. So this is also, not the latest track, and I don't want to refresh the page because it seems to be kind of choppy already as it is. But if the storm is at this point tomorrow, the storm is not going to shrink in size. I can guarantee you that. It may grow, it may maintain the same size. So if you put the center of the storm that's currently here, right here, that's going to reach all up in here. So you're still going to receive some rain and some gusty winds, but I think impacts have really come down for the northern Outer Banks, especially past Cape Hatteras, just because of the geography of that area and how it's angled differently. I think you're going to be spared from the worst from this storm. And this map is kind of jumpy, so I'll go back over to this loop. Yeah, the eye really doesn't seem as defined. It's really, from this morning, it was looking very impressive, and it's really struggling with some southerly shear, and it's over, bath water. It's over some very warm water. I understand earlier today the water temp was inside the storm. It was, yeah. It's, and you have a unique occurrence with these storms. They pull up so much water they cause a phenomenon called upwelling, where you have colder water that's further down being pulled up to the surface. And if the storm lingers in one location for too long, it can actually kind of use all the hot water up. It's like, imagine the ocean's a hot water heater. If you use all of it, if you pull all of that ocean heat content up, you're going to run out eventually. So if the storm's not moving swiftly enough, which Florence is moving at a pretty good clip at this point, but as it slows down, it may struggle with kind of mixing that water and not tapping into the warmest water it has available. So that could lend itself to continuing to kind of struggle with that. But the eye has really become not as defined. Earlier, the eye kind of clouds became obscured over it, and it was really struggling. That shear really seems to have kind of whacked off the southern part of the storm. But I think that it's going to, when a radar image, you can expect we're going to see the center, down here, and the radar will just be covered up in this area, and you won't see anything offshore. So when we look at radar, well, I just erased my drawing there, but when that's the radar image we'll see, and this configuration of the storm, it's going to be pulling all that moisture off the Atlantic Ocean. So there's going to be plenty of rain. Don't let this fool you, that it looks disorganized, so there's going to be less rain or less wind. It's actually a bigger storm. So the wind field's expanding. So if I go back to the National Hurricane Center official forecast graphic, the wind field is about the size of Central North Carolina and South Carolina put together right now. So that's not going to change. That keeps expanding. It's a very large storm. It's kind of, when the storms get large, to get a little unorganized. It's hard for them to kind of maintain their strength, and they're very clumsy. They kind of wobble back and forth. So those small changes in the tracks can lead to big impacts in terms of where exactly the storm comes ashore. So I'm going to start winding down here. I've been on for about an hour, and time has flown by once again. I have plenty of resources here. I didn't do this last night. I said I was going to share them, and I never did, but I'm going to share a list of links after this. Some of these viewers are really cool, and it's great if you use like one at a time, but I have them all open, so my computer is kind of working really hard to keep up with this while doing the broadcast at the same time. So I will post those links so you can view them as well and give you as much information as possible. Want to reiterate the storm surge thread again. This is a good viewer that kind of shows everything. Storm surge impacts up into here. Parts of Pamlico and Beaufort County may be submerged in more of these estuary and wetland habitats out here maybe underwater for some time. And then I'm not exactly sure why this is not showing a bigger threat down here in Wilmington. I'm not sure if this model data is outdated or if something else is wrong, but be aware that this area is under a very high risk for storm surge, and it's becoming more concerning with each run. It looks like if the storm, the further south the storm goes, really the worse it is for Wilmington. So that southern track may be better for some of the central Carolina communities, central North Carolina, like the Triad and Triangle and Charlotte and the Sand Hills. But down here, Myrtle Beach into Wilmington, it's not looking good for those areas, just because the storm's going to linger there for so long. It's just going to be a mess. So for us, just I say us as in Central North Carolina. I cover Central North Carolina for the most part, but this is certainly a statewide storm that affects everyone. So it's just prepare for a lot of wind and rain. It's going to be an extraordinary event. You may have heard it being called a once in a lifetime storm. We don't know that for sure at this point, but it's going to be significant. It's going to have a lot of impacts, and we just hope the best for our friends down in Wilmington and the Myrtle Beach area. And it's time to, the time for preparations has, ended now, and it's time to, kind of watch the storm come ashore and just, stay safe. Don't go out driving. Don't try to take, you can take a video of the wind from inside your house, but don't go outside. The risk of too many people, lose their life from falling trees or being in vehicles when trees fall on their vehicle. Don't be a statistic. There are probably dozens of people that are alive today that may not have their lives this time next week. It's a very sobering thought, but that's the power of these storms. People are going to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and don't be a statistic. Don't be one of those people that get caught in the wrong place. Make smart decisions. I can't reiterate that enough. Don't underestimate the storm surge risk if you're at the coast. For those watching inland, don't underestimate the flooded roads. Turn around, don't drown. Don't drive through flooded water. You're not a boat, you're a car. You're made to drive on land. Unless you have pontoons on your car, don't drive through standing water. That pretty much wraps it up. That's my spiel. So I have a bunch of these resources. I'll share the links with everyone. But if you have any more questions, just feel free to message me offline and I'll get back to them. I'll try to do a live stream tomorrow afternoon as the storm really begins to make its presence felt. But I think I'm going to sign off for tonight. So if there are not any more questions, I'm going to end it here. And I will keep you all posted through. You can follow me on Twitter at Andrew WX Center. There's no S because there's not enough character limit on Twitter, so it's just Andrew WX Center. You can follow me there, or just message me on Facebook. I will post this to YouTube afterward in case I have a different kind of audience on YouTube that watch the videos. So I will post it on there, and also you can rewatch this at any time. And yeah, feel free to share and stay safe. And I hope that everyone has a good night. Get some rest. These storms are exhausting to track. It's it's a long process to watch it come on shore and then have to endure everything. So we'll get through it together. It'll be fine. Just stay safe, hunker down, don't go outside. And so thank you, Teresa. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Glad I could be of help to some of you. I try to present the information, at least a diverse amount of information, in a couple of different ways than you see on TV. TV kind of has a strict way, and National Weather Service too. They have a strict guideline of ways they have to show the information. So I try to be a little more free and open, have more of a conversational style. But yeah, I think I'm going to end it here. So thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to message me, and I will see you on the next live stream.